and I want to share some of the highlights of that with you. Now, environmental scientists are telling us that these historic floods, take the last 2 years and this year, floods in Louisiana, floods in Iowa, floods in Missouri, you name it, floods. All right, related, it is said, by the climatologists to the climate. If the climate shall go on making problems for us, then the rain coming down when we don't want it will continue to make problems for us. And you get to the point where some of these scientists have simply said water has become the worst disaster that Mother Nature can dump on us. It's a new normalcy. And as I go through this history of the town and the floods, you will see that we have always had the little slogan, April showers bring May flowers, and if you haven't said your prayers, then also a Missouri River flood. Now this has been part of our life forever and a day. And now the warnings are worse, more severe. And yet, if you watch St. Louis PBS, many evenings of the week, there'll be a tiny little ad. It's not one of these flamboyant things, but it simply says, water matters. And we think, yeah, you bloody well know it does. After all these years and after all these rainfalls. And water was very important, obviously, to the immigrants, or we wouldn't be here and you wouldn't be here. Because the immigrants followed the Missouri and the Mississippi. Coming down the Katy Trail, as you have, you've heard bits and pieces of this story, but there are some bits and pieces that I would like to share with you. Maybe you've not heard them. For instance, did it become clear to you that most of the towns you have seen are called landings? Landings, because at the bottom of this depression, okay, the Indians and the later immigrants could schlep, and I'm sure that's the word they use, they could schlep their boats onto relatively level land, and they didn't have to climb those high bluffs to see, is it really more green on the other side? So these landing towns included many that you've seen in the last week. Marthasville, New Haven, Washington, and this place called Mount Pleasant before it was called Augusta. And these river landings were first settled in the 1700s by Anglo-Americans from the South. They were called Anglo-Americans, Tennesseans, and Kentuckians for the most part, Scotch-Irish, who brought their plantation and slave culture with them in the late 1700s. And the people in Europe were living in a very restless time and were watching this, and this absolutely fantastic thing happened, that a President Jefferson bought a whole chunk of land from Napoleon, and to buy from Napoleon and decrease his holdings. This was good news for the Germans, okay? So they waited a while, and when they heard that Lewis and Clark made it up the river, and that a steamboat had made it out of St. Louis up the river away, and still their politics were quite disturbed around them, they began talking more and more, we're going to immigrate. Now is the time. Now is really the time to go. And this was not unproblematic, because when they got here, the immigrants, here were all these restless Anglo-Americans, had heard the Santa Fe Trail is open. And if there were ever an adventurous immigrant people, it was the Scotch-Irish. If there's something new, we're going to go. Yeah, and we're going to take a look at it. We're going to take the advantages. So, okay, Germans, you want to buy our land? We've cultivated it a little bit. We haven't done the best job, but we will sell it to you. Man, what more do you need? There's an open trail to the west, the new trail, Santa Fe Trail, and somebody wants to buy the land you've just sort of mucked around on. You haven't really done a good job of farming. So the Germans find this very, very advantageous, and under the Germans, these Missouri River communities then really begin to blossom. Of course they blossom. Aren't we Germans good at doing what we want to do? Yes. But it's more than just us. There were three groups of immigrants. One group were the book-learning professions. These are the preachers and teachers. Man, they'll tell you how good you've got it, yeah? And they'll tell you how maybe you ought to live in this immigrant area. So there were the preachers and the teachers, the learned ones. Then there were all these folks who were farmers, and they were absolutely convinced they'd never owned land in Europe, but they knew how to farm this land. Oh yeah, until they went out and cut down the first trees and dug the stumps out of the earth. Now, the folks that had it really good, let's call them craftsmen, the people who hung up a sign, saddles for sale, shoes for sale, wine for sale, beer for sale, cloth for sewing, thread. You could put up a sign for anything except toilet paper. They didn't have that. you could really, everything was needed on the frontier. Put up a sign for anything you can make, lady or gentleman, and you will do very well. And so these communities grew. Now, Augusta is a little bit different from some of these communities, so intriguing in a way that I want to share just a few details with you. When the Germans came here, almost no one in their group had ever cast a ballot. All right? It is 1830, and there is no Germany. There are German provinces. The highest form of organization in the provinces are the crafts unions. Well, you might get to vote for somebody to be chief saddle maker and all of that, but you sure as heck never voted for a prince or a king or anybody who called themselves that. Yeah. So they had to learn this whole routine. And they did, for 25 years, live very quietly under St. Charles County government. Okay, this is a town up here on the river. St. Charles County is where you're going next. It's a nice little a town, and that's the center of your government. Meanwhile, your other center of government is by river up at Jeff City. And it takes a bit of rowing to get yourself up there. It's easier to float down to St. Charles and raise hell with them about the roads than go up to St. Charles. But one day, a bad thing happened, a Christmas Eve. You see, we always say these people got along real good. No, they didn't. There was a group of Hessians. They were good soldiers. There was a group of Westphalians. They were very good organizers. But one Hessian called a Westphalian a sowieso at night when they were drinking, celebrating the Christmas Eve. And with a 4-inch pocket knife, 4 inches, that wonderful display of diversity ended. And they ran all over town looking for a sheriff, looking for a doctor, looking for somebody of authority. There's nobody there. And this disturbs the businessmen very much. So within the next week, they decide, even if it's difficult, if we have to row upriver, we got to go to Jeff City. We have to ask them, may we please have a town with our own elected officers? Well, the Anglo-Americans at Jeff City had a wonderful question. Do you all think you can obey the laws? And the Germans had one wonderful word as answer. Come on, everybody. Jawohl. All right. So a town, it's called a special charter legislative town. Special charter legislative town is granted in 1855. And guess what laws we still have? 1855. Same charter. Obedient people that long. Okay, now we come to have to appoint the first 5-man town board. This is interesting history. The first 5-man town board includes a saddle maker, a shoemaker, a pub keeper, of course, and 2 storekeepers. This is where Mama's going to get the thread and the material and do all the work while Papa's out doing something else, okay? And they have to appoint also a river and wharf, WHARF, inspector, because this is a river town. You're not going to have a street inspector. You're going to have a river town, and you're going to learn mighty fast what that means. Because we've got people building a town up here on the hills, and they bring in lots of lumber from St. Charles and St. Louis. And the steamboats land down there, and the lumber is offloaded, and oh my goodness, so much of it is forgotten. And a week later, it's still there, and people are stumbling over it, and so forth. So you've got to have this wharf inspector to go and remind Mama Lindbergh, you ordered this lumber to build a house, now get it off the levee. Yeah, because we have other boats coming, and the levee is not that big. And besides, we have tourists coming. It only costs a penny or 2 pennies a mile to come from St. Charles up here by boat. When you get back to St. Charles today, you'll think about cheap transportation. And you not only pay very little on the steamer, but you will later see, if you have not seen already, these big inns, 2- and 3-story inns down at, well, it's the riverfront again. There's water there. Take a good look. And you could stay at one of those inns and have a free bottle of wine or a free bottle of beer. So why not go to Augusta, Missouri on your honeymoon? I don't know where the word honeymoon came from in the German language. But people came who said they were honeymooning and stayed in those inexpensive hotels. But, you know, it's not always so great to live on the river. If you don't believe it, wait till my story is over and ask me if I enjoyed my lifetime on the river. River towns, precisely because they were river towns, had horrible problems. One was health. there were a bunch of people who thought that water transmitted diseases. So, okay, you made all kinds of exciting advertisements. The town on the bluffs, the healthy town of Augusta on the bluffs. You're way above the water, you'll be okay. Yeah? And just to make sure that people got the point, they posted a sign down at the riverfront, no bathing, fine $1. All right? So you had this problem of the diseases, and there were the cholera epidemics. Think, the people came in 1830. 1832, cholera. 1844, cholera. 1848, cholera. 1854, cholera. In those first, all the years before the Civil War. And then the diseases, well, simple, typhus, malaria, pneumonia, were prevalent. Were there no doctors, you ask? Yes, of course there were doctors. Among these preaching, teaching, fine first group of people, there were doctors with good European training, but now they're sitting out here on the frontier. Where are they going to get medicines? Where are they going to keep up with their field, so to speak? Well, if you can't keep up, you make up, yeah? And this one, I think, interests a lot of us, because the medicines of the day were, guess what was most prevalent? Quinine. Good for everything that ever ailed you and might ever ail you. Quinine. Tasted dreadful, but never mind. And then there was a kind of a tea, calomel, and this was good. If the quinine didn't get you, try the tea, also good for everything. And if you were a child, waiting for you was the castor oil. Oh, yes. Yes. And for ladies, I'm sorry to have to report this, but the advertisements in the newspapers said that we were really a very high-strung, nervous gender. And we had great problems coping with life. And the one medicine that would really help us sort of settle down was Ladonium. Now, it just happens to have morphine in it. Yeah. Okay, if we can't take care of the women and keep them calm, then we got something special for you men folks. Camphor dissolved in alcohol. How does that sound? Pretty grim? Yes. Okay. And nevertheless, we're going to try to keep the people well, and we're going to try to keep them safe. But the river is the river is the river, and teenage boys are teenage boys. And the history of our riverfront records 5 teenage deaths by drowning, many not swimming, not necessarily swimming, wading. Okay? The saddest story is 2 brothers. They did not drown on the same day, on the same year, but in the very same place below the river. Go down there later and take a look at where the bridge is that goes down to the river bottom. So there were the 2 brothers, there was another 12-year-old, and the most recent, and there's really no excuse for this. By that time, had the parents not all learned to say to the children, that river has a deathly current. You do not go into it. 1951, a 12-year-old teenage boy, whose sister and cousin still live around here, went wading, and he is with us no longer. 12 years old in the 1951 flood. And still today, take a good look. when you are down there at the trail, there are no signs that say no swimming when flooded. Yeah, there's a sign that says road closed, but if you're not a tractor or a trailer, if you're a teenage child, as we saw last week, school was closed, nobody reminded the kiddies. They're out in their swim trunks, waiting at the edge of the water. Do you, as an ancient one, get out of your car and say, oh, for God's sake, get out of the water? We don't need another death. You can imagine what I would have been told. Yeah. If the teachers didn't tell them at school, and school was out because of closed roads, and the parents didn't tell them at home, and there was no sign, we're lucky. It was 3 children playing in the edge of the water. Okay, got by with that this time, fortunately. By the 1870s, there was really dramatic river history being made. The Missouri River decided it didn't like all those Germans. Yeah, they were always given orders, and they were always doing things. Everything's up to be orderly, and God, why don't they just quit? And so the Missouri River decides it's going to quit. Yeah? It begins to change its course. Is that news? Not at all. Not at all. The Missouri River is one of these meandering rivers. It had changed its course 100 dozen times in history. But what do you do about it? You're a farmer. You came as an immigrant, and you settled a place down near the river edge, and now the river is coming and eating this soil, washing it away, bridges, roads, whatever. And so they tried to invent all kinds of things. One thing I thought was very quite unique, they put huge metal triangles against the embankment of the river. The triangle is going to hold the earth? No. The water is going to carry the triangle away. And so that doesn't do any good. And finally, the river simply leaves down here from the front of Augusta and moves 2.5 miles south where it now is. That is, if it's not flooded. Yeah. In normal times, it's 2.5 miles south. So finally, after enough years around here, you ask yourself, because you paid no attention to the Indians' explanation, who are the Indians? They know from nothing. Why does the river have this incredible current? Yeah? You can live as I did on the banks of the Rhine River in Germany for years and years and years, and you can count an excursion boat every hour on the hour. Did you ever see an excursion boat on the Missouri? No. Why? Because it's a schizophrenic river. and I want to try to explain to you, and if somebody is a scientist and has a better explanation, now or at midnight call me, but now tell me, interrupt me. But the explanation we have is, okay, all rivers run downhill. Yeah, that's not new. But this Missouri runs downhill like crazy. And why does it run downhill like crazy? It goes past 12 miles of falls. Remember the story, Lewis and Clark discovering the falls in Montana? All right. Those falls drop 139 miles. So you start in Montana with 3,400 feet elevation, and you drop down to 800 at St. Louis. Well, that's a heck of a drop. And that is where you get the swiftness of this current that no child should test. And the Corps of Engineers tell you be careful what boats you put out on that water. That is our explanation for why we don't go wading. Okay. Well, one day, this meandering, crazy, schizophrenic river has gone from Augusta, and the folks here look out of their windows, and they don't see water anymore. Now, this is my hope for us all tomorrow, yes, but I have to tell this historically. And what do they see? They see land. Ooh, terrific. That's got to be really great agricultural land, because for years the water has brought the deposits. All right, these Germans aren't dumb. The next question is, so who owns it? Yep, we didn't own any land in Germany, and we didn't own the water. Now the water's gone, now what? Ooh, lawyers were right there to give an explanation. There is an international law called the law of accretion. Accretion. And it says you own the land to the water's edge. If the water's edge moves, your ownership of land moves. And lo and behold, the little town of Augusta that has just lost its riverfront has collected without paying a penny 270 acres of fertile soil. And it's what pays our taxes. Yeah, a big chunk of our taxes. Now, all these farmers, okay, I get it. I get this accretion law, and I can own some of this land now. That's a good deal. But why are you calling me a river bottom farmer? Well, that's simple. You are now farming the bottom of what was the Missouri River. You don't like the name? Tell it to the steamboat captains, yeah? You're also a river rat, because you never leave the river. Once you know how good the soil is, yeah? You just keep working it and working it, even if you've got that same old problem of the floods. There was a historic flood that nobody wanted to believe the Indians when they told them. That was 1844. And then in the 1920s, there was a flood in 03 and 15, and it seemed that a cycle had been begun. And one explanation that, again, I think is quite logical, some of the historians said, well, if you hadn't had steamboats all these years, you'd have been all right. But steam requires burned wood. And the wood are the trees on the embankment. And you anchored your boat and dashed up there and cut every tree in sight. Yeah? And then you wonder about erosion? You gotta be mad. Don't you all ever think logically? Yeah? And so the problem of erosion became very serious. And one historian has figured out the following. I can't prove that it's true or not, but to take one boat, steamboat, and send it out on a 2-month trip, and if you could have stacked up the wood that it burned in these 2 months, it would have covered one football field 5 feet deep. That's a lot of my cottonwood and sycamore trees going down the drain. Okay. And so what happens when things don't go good? Oh, let's ask the government to help us. Hey, government, you got a Corps of Engineers. What the heck are they doing? Help us. Help us. We asked you to help us in